Namaskar, good evening. In the run-up to the G20 summit that is to be held in New Delhi later this year and the summit of the future of the United Nations that is to be held next year in 2024, the G20 Developmental Summit, the Developmental Ministers Summit was held in Varanasi that just concluded. And so today would be an apt day to look at the outcomes of the meeting. Obviously, the meeting happening under the auspices of India's presidentship. India is the president of the G20 for the year 2023. So it would be important again at this moment to take a look at the outcomes of the meeting. Now, this meeting was attended by close to 200 delegates who arrived and congregated at Varanasi. They were addressed by the Prime Minister of India. Also attending this whole meeting was the Foreign Minister, the External Affairs Minister of India. And so, we will in this video take a look at the outcomes of the meeting. What exactly did the G20 consider? What exactly did they deliberate upon? And what exactly have they finalized? Have they arrived at some consensus on some particular topic? We will explore all of that in this very short stream. Okay? So to jump straight into the topic, once again, the Development Ministers meeting that just concluded today in Varanasi, Uttar Pradesh. So what we are seeking to understand in this video are the 5 takeaways from this particular meeting. Okay, the 5 takeaways from this particular meeting is what we are looking to understand. The first one is what the statement says. In fact, if you have taken a look at, well, obviously I'll tell you what has happened is that after the meeting concluded, 3 documents were released by the External Affairs Ministry in India. So those 3 documents are essentially, they hold within themselves the whole outcome of the meetings. So one by one we try and understand what exactly did happen during this meeting. So the first statement that you find when you go through these reports, the first statement, the first outcome of this meeting is that development is a core issue for the global south. Now, once again, as a student of civil services examination, someone who's looking to, say, crack the civil services and needs to have a basic outlook of the whole international relations and the whole connotations associated with it, you will understand that India raking up this issue during its own meeting, during its presidentship in Varanasi, is essentially a major boost to its claims as the voice of the global south. Which is why this particular was included in the statement, the opening point of India's document that was released, the outcome document in fact, which says that development is a core issue for the global south. And what are the reasons that are put forward? Well, first is that the disruptions that were caused due to the coronavirus pandemic, well, that has severely impacted and disproportionately impacted the global south, the developing world. They also say that food, fuel and fertilizer crises have become real because of geopolitical tensions, indirectly referring to the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Once again, the global south, well, reinforcing its points as to why it has been on the losing side, why it has got the worst side of this bargain. The G20 acknowledging that it has the collective responsibility not to let the sustainable development goals fall behind, that it should be on the priority of the global conversation, that Agenda 2030, you will only understand Agenda 2030 and you will only realize Agenda 2030 if you compulsorily empower the global south to deal with the problems that it is facing. Okay? The statement also saying that G20 actions to create opportunities for all and it will address structural vulnerabilities and imbalances. Once again, India speaking for the less privileged of the countries, the least developed countries and the small island states. So once again, if you're writing an answer on India as the voice of global south, well, these would be good points to consider. Which is why these videos, these classes, these sessions, they have a cumulative effect in increasing your knowledge. So out of this 15-minute session, you will probably get 5 actionable points, but then those 5 actionable points will enrich your answer to no end. Okay? So this is point number 1, the first outcome, that India essentially solidifying its voice, its position as the voice, the leader of the global south. Point number 2, the outcome number 2 that we're looking at, well, this is what the G20 statement says. That G20 efforts should be comprehensive, inclusive, fair and sustainable. Once again, referring to the SDGs, the G20 saying that G20 should increase investment in fulfilling the SDGs and find solutions to address the debt risks. That countries once again in the global south are disproportionately affected by the current economic architecture, the financial architecture that exists. And which is why you need to empower these countries first, secure their financial stability if Agenda 2030 is to be realized in time. Once again, when you compare the contemporary situation, that the world is experiencing an economic slowdown, that there are geopolitical tensions, climate change is happening, which is why Agenda 2030, the whole sustainable development goals that have to be realized by 2030, those take center stage. Will they be realized? Will they be reached? Will countries be able to fulfill their commitments? Thereafter, the G20 presidentship, the G20 statement also talking about the reform of the multilateral financial institutions. Once again, referring to the Bridgetown Agenda. For those of you who do not know, the Bridgetown Agenda is to do with the reform of the IMF and the World Bank. Now you might ask me, what kind of reform? Well, a host of reforms. Firstly, they need to be including the whole conversation around climate change. These banks need to be taking the lead insofar as climate financing is concerned. At the same time, a stock taking has to be done as to whether these multilateral financial institutions have been actually able to alleviate poverty. With the vast amount of capital that they have spent, what has been achieved so far? A stock taking needs to be done. A course correction may also need to be considered. Okay. So the points that you need to remember, the Bridgetown Agenda, which essentially talks about the reform of the World Bank plus the IMF, the different multilateral financing institutions. The G20 statement also saying that the finance should not just be available, it should also be accessible. That countries should be able to dip into the financial pool whenever it's needed for them. And finally, India bringing up the model of aspirational districts in India. The statement saying that, well, India has invested in her aspirational districts, the districts that were relatively below the developmental lines, and that has paid dividends for us. Those districts have now become catalysts of growth. So if this can be done within India, why can't this model be replicated across the developing world? Essentially calling for more investment, more empowerment of these LDCs, these island states, the part of the global south essentially. Okay, this is my second outcome. Number 3, India also talking about data divide, accessibility and availability of internet. Essentially that every individual should have access to internet. The privacy should be protected. Now that United Nations has recognized internet as a basic human right, a fundamental right, which is why India bringing up that the future should look to address the growing data divide. High quality data critical for these 3 things: meaningful policy making, efficient resource allocation and effective public service delivery. Right from the ideation of policy up until the delivery of the policy. So you might ask me, how does it help in meaningful policy making? Well, you have more access to data. You are able to make customized policies for customized areas. So that has to be included. Number 2, resource allocation. Well, obviously you have transparency. No more is the human factor involved. It's all faceless. It's all online. So obviously, this will help in the transparency bit, the accountability bit. And thereafter, in terms of public service delivery, well, obviously, you are looking at targeted delivery. the beneficiary will get the benefit that they're supposed to get rather than pilferage of the benefit happening. Okay. Thereafter, the G20 statement talking about democratization of technology and that data should be made accessible. Digital India being the focus of this whole conversation as to how Indian government, the government of India and the whole Republic of India has managed to democratize internet to an extent that UPI has become commonplace. People would rather keep UPI, use UPI than keep cash. So if the Indian example can be replicated across the global south, then it can further empower the percolation of internet, also the availability of finance to hitherto unexplored families. Right? So obviously as a credible partner, as a credible stakeholder, as a country that has a sample set of 140 crore and has been successful in that, India offering its own expertise, its own services across the developing world so as to address the growing data divide. The fourth outcome of this meeting, again, mission life, very important, especially from the exam perspective. What is mission life? Well, at COP26 in the year 2021, the Prime Minister announced mission life. Why? And what is the focus of it? Well, individual behaviors, that the behavior of you and I has to change. And only if that change, only can we address the global climate action narrative. That all policies and all institutions and all government side aside, the eventual responsibility has to be behavioral. You and I need to change and mend our ways. And that is to be addressed by mission life, which envisions replacing the prevalent use and dispose economy governed by mindless destructive consumption, and you introduce a circular economy. That there is no wastage, recycling is a part of that process. Once again, pointing to the behavioral change that is required in an individual. Simple acts in our daily lives, not using plastic, using a jute bag, not using plastic bottles, using a glass bottle. Simple acts are a part of mission life, intended to bring about change of an individual's behavior. Okay. In the larger realm, obviously looking at forming a more complete circular economy. Okay. Mission life plans to create and nurture a global network, and this is the term that you use, the pro-planet people, the P3 of mission life. Again, essentially to do with the individual behavioral change. India, the G20 statement, extensively stressing on mission life as a key component of the climate action narrative. That you cannot go ahead and combat climate change and prepare humanity for climate change until and unless you address the individual also. The policy, the mission life, looking to address the individual. Finally, the last outcome and the final outcome from the G20 development meeting that happened in Varanasi, and it talks about gender equality. Talking about women's empowerment as being absolutely crucial, again, if you are to reach Agenda 2030. Right? India saying that we are not limited to women's empowerment, ours is a women-led development. Okay. Essentially voicing its credibility as a partner, as a country that has empowered a large section of its population. And so if that model again can be replicated in some form or dimension across the G20 countries. Right? Collect, analyze and disseminate data to develop and strengthen evidence-based policies. Coupled with the data divide, you are essentially looking at governance going online to better serve the aspirations of the people. G20 once again talking about addressing both of these, not just the data divide but also making sure that you have evidence-based public policies. What are evidence-based? Well, it's targeted, it's based on substantial information, it has a particular purpose in mind, a particular target group in mind, and only then can a policy qualify to be called as an evidence-based public policy. All right? Yes, Jyotirmay, that is my code. That is my code, BA Live. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So that brings us to the end of this particular small series, small session that I had for you on the G20 outcomes that were held in Varanasi. Like I told you, 3 documents were released by the Government of India. An outcome document. An outcome document was released, number 1. An action plan for accelerating the SDG, number 2. And a high-level principle on lifestyle, basically mission life, number 3. These 3 documents essentially have been summarized in this video, broken down for you so that you can use them in your answers, in your essays, in your interview, wherever you find this information useful. And so you look at this. According to the meeting's outcome, the G20 meeting reached a consensus on 14 points, except 2 related to the Russia-Ukraine invasion. So if you look at the particular document that has been released by the Foreign Ministry, you will see that straight away in the first page it is written that all parties reached agreement on all the points except the 2 points. Those 2 paragraphs talking about the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and obviously different nations have different perspectives there. Otherwise, this meeting that was held in Varanasi, it is of immense significance insofar as solidifying India's position is concerned. That India has managed to gain consensus on so many issues. Okay, obviously the Russia-Ukraine crisis is something that is possibly beyond the ambit of G20. It is something for the UNSC to consider and possibly bring and negotiate on. But G20 in its limited capability, this meeting, the outcomes of it, given that the G20 Leaders Summit is going to happen in New Delhi in September, I'm sure you must be aware, the G20 Leaders Summit, okay, happening in New Delhi in September. And thereafter, you have the Summit of the Future, very, very important guys. The Summit of the Future being held by the United Nations. It will be a landmark summit wherein they will chart out the course for the coming days to be held in the year 2024. So in the run-up to these 2 events, the G20 Leaders Summit, just a couple of months from now, and the Summit of the Future, that is to be held in the year 2024, what you are looking at is that with this consensus that has been arrived, a lot of the groundwork has been already laid down so as to make sure that these summits and these meetings are not just talk shops. That it's not just old friends meeting and hanging out. They're actually going to come out with some actionable report, some point that will serve humanity well in the future. And for that, you need to have consensus building instruments. So G20's meeting in Varanasi will be landmark, will be crucial, especially in the run-up to this particular meeting in September. Now that you know that most of the countries, in fact all the countries, have reached consensus on 14 points, except obviously Russia-Ukraine, which is beyond the ambit of G20. What you are seeing is that India has used her presidency of the G20 to the fullest. Okay? On that note, my dear students, my dear viewers, I take leave of you, but not before I have 2 very short slides for you. Number 1 is this particular. If you enjoyed this particular discussion, this particular analysis, well, feel free, and I request you to join me on my official Telegram channel. We do a lot of knowledge sharing there, and I do not spam. Okay, I promise not to spam. So go ahead, scan this particular code and join me in my official Telegram channel. And if you are a student who appeared for the civil services this year but was not successful, and well, most likely the result would have been unsuccessful, bad because of CSAT. So here is your chance for redemption. Go ahead, sign up for this course. Okay, I have spoken extensively about 2 courses that StudyIQ IAS has come up with. One is a prelims to interview course. The complete segment from prelims to interview for a student. We will handhold you. We will be there with you 24/7, covering each and every part of the syllabus. So that course beginning on the 19th, I have just done a video on that on the StudyIQ IAS English channel. Go through it. Okay. The features of the course have been discussed. How will you benefit from that course has been discussed in detail. And the second one is this course, the CSAT course, beginning on the 30th of June. And herein, the best of the faculty. Okay, I will be taking care of the reading comprehension. I have another 2 colleagues, the sharpest of brains, individuals with vast experience. They will be taking care of maths and reasoning for you. And the whole point of this exercise is that the mistakes of 2023 should not be repeated. That students need to be made aware that UPSC examination has changed. That the dust has settled on the 2023 examination, and the best course for any student is to prepare himself or herself to the best of their ability. And for that, obviously, you will need to focus on CSAT. So this course, beginning on the 30th of June, if you use this particular code BA Live, well, you will be best served because you will save close to what? 10,000 rupees. So go ahead. Seats are limited. I am told that we have not a lot of seats left. We want to keep it short, small batches, so as to better serve the interests of our dear students. On that note, my students, my dear viewers, that's a wrap wherein we discussed the G20 meeting, the outcomes of this meeting, and how important this meeting in Varanasi was in the run-up to the G20 Leaders Summit that is to be held in New Delhi in a few months from now, in September 2023 in fact. Alright, on that note, for all those of you who were watching me live and all those of you who will be watching this in the days and hours to come, thank you for watching. I hope that you consider to leave a like or a comment for me, and I'll see you once again 9 p.m. tomorrow with another such topic. Till then,